real life is not a zero-sum game. It's becoming a fighter. I'm going to fight through this, and not all of it is like, hey, I'm 55-0. Like sometimes you're going to get knocked down, you're going to take defeats, but it's committing to fight. And sort of the mantra was, if you're in the right fight, quitting is not an option.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Path of the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Zach Shoemaker, and joining me today is a very special guest. He's the lead pastor of one church in Columbus, Ohio. He brings a rare blend of athletic discipline, corporate strategy, and raw emotional intelligence to the pulpit. He's been called by some the Tony Robbins of the church for his ability to bridge the gap between faith and high performance, and there's none other than Pastor Greg Ford. Pastor Greg, appreciate you taking time to come on today.
Hey, man, thank you, Zach, for the opportunity, man, to be a part of this. And I've been looking forward to this conversation since I saw that we were going to have it, man. So thanks for welcoming me on.
Absolutely. It's an absolute honor. So I would like to kick off each and every single show talking about your testimony and learning a little bit about your backstory. You know, you've obviously grown one church into a very bright church right now, growing rapidly. But you're beginning stories of this. You know, I know you obviously were a football player. You transitioned a little bit into that. You're working at the gym, golf courses, and while still pastoring in the very beginning. Like, I just want to know your story. Obviously, what placed all this in your heart to say, you know what, I want to go into ministry. I want to be a pastor.
Man, I appreciate you asking that question. Yeah, so I grew up in church, good parents, good church. So no shade on any of them, but I wasn't really that engaged with it. I was really kind of, like you mentioned, I was more thinking about sports and all of those things. And so really grew up in many ways. That was my identity was athletics and being an athlete. And so really driven that way. And I went into college. I played football in college. And when I was growing up as a kid, the one thing I loved to do was to go to our church summer camp. So that was probably like my favorite part about church. It was the summer camp. And so when I was in college, I thought, I'm going to go and give back and just, invest in students. And so I came back not thinking in any way it was going to turn into like what I'm doing now, but I just went back and really just pouring into young people, seeing God's hand on that. It just really sparked something in my heart. And so I went through a process of seeking God on, Lord, what do you have for me? What am I supposed to do with my life? And I kind of, thought maybe I'll do business. And I thought maybe I'll coach, but I just kept feeling drawn into ministry. And at the time it was youth. So I was a youth pastor at first. And then I actually coached football at the local junior high. So and basketball, actually, both sports. So I would go and, again, build relationships that way. And then some of them would end up coming to the church and it would end up in some deeper conversations. So did that for a long time. Loved my time working on a staff. And I worked for some really great leaders. And then I just felt led to start a church. And so my wife and I moved here to Columbus, Ohio, 16 years ago. So we did a year of pre-launch. Like we just met people. I worked a job at a local fitness center. And so I was the morning guy. I would scan people in and learn names. I'd be like, hey, Zach, nice to meet you. And I'd be looking for you next time you came in. Put your key away. Let me type you in and then built friendships that way. So that's really how we started the church, which is kind of funny because we didn't really have very many like Christians or believers in the church to start, but everybody was into fitness. So people would like show up at the church and they'd be like, dude, I feel like I need to do some jumping jacks or something, because everybody I met was at the gym. It wasn't like some master plan, but it just kind of worked out that way. And then, people start giving their lives to Christ and, the church kind of took off from there. So that's kind of the broad strokes of the story.
I love that. I kind of want to go into that community aspect because, I think so many people look at the church at large and we know it's a massive church at large, but you talk about that community aspect, really starting to build something up. And it wasn't even, as you said, just, I'm going to bring in all these believers and bring in all these people. It's reaching exactly how God calls us to, who the local community, the body, the other people that are not believers yet. As you kind of were able to grow in that aspect and say, you know what, I'm truly just, watching these people grow from, day one in the walk with Jesus, or at least early stages, to now watch them develop. How special has that been?
Man, it was exciting and overwhelming at the same time.
Mm,
So, I have 3 kids of my own. My wife and I made 3 little people.
mm,
And it's kind of like parenting in that you have this excitement about you see them come to life and you see them growing, but
mm,
you feel overwhelmed that this is a huge task. And so the way that the church ended up starting, like I said, we had a lot of people that were brand new to church or new to faith. In
mhm.
fact, some of them I think just came to the church really almost like as a favor to me. Like this poor guy, he got up and worked the early shift for a year. He learned my name. We became friends. Like, I'll just come by and like pay him a visit, one week. And then, they hear the gospel, it touches their heart. And next thing you know, they're part of the church. So in a sense, right, we probably had at the time, about 150 people or so at the beginning. Probably 70-80% of them were just what we might call baby Christians or whatever. Like they were
Right.
believers. So in a sense, you feel like you have, 70, 80 babies at one time that you're trying to make sure they're getting what they need, making sure they have the support they need, that people working them, helping them work through healing, that they're connecting, that they're learning what they need to learn. And that was overwhelming. That at times I felt almost, I always felt like I wasn't doing a good enough job. It always felt like, man, we just can't get to everything. And but that takes time from a organizational development standpoint to build the infrastructure,
Right.
be able to support the growth. And so, in the last 15 years, since we officially started the church, we've worked really hard to do that, to make sure that we're not just sort of having an event every weekend that people come, hear some music, hear a message, and leave, but that we have a community that can actually meet people where they are, help them walk through, and that's sustainable for people in their journey. So that's the hard work of community building.
Right.
Frankly, I think in this day, I love that there's so much good information out there and there's good content being created. But man, I continue to want to challenge people who have a God given gift of leadership to not shy away from the hard work of community building.
Mm,
It's just so needed. Like, I mean, content's awesome, but it
right.
comes to life in relationships. It comes to life in community, which is messy and it's challenging and it's hard and it takes a lot of intentionality and commitment. But that's what we've done our best to do, and it's cool to see the fruit of that. So I definitely feel very privileged. There are people who work just as hard, if not harder, than I have, and haven't been able to see maybe the fruit for one reason or another. And I never take that for granted. It's been awesome.
I love what you just talked about right there because it's just, starting from the ground stage, the baby Christians and helping them develop over time. And you talk about building this infrastructure. And I think that really goes back to the basics of growing the church at large. And, this past weekend, obviously it's been for a while, but there's so many deep theological talks that the Christians want to have. And, I think at large, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I think sometimes it becomes too much that we forget, at the end of the day, our job is to go out there and grow the kingdom, to be the light, help people that they're not interested in, this deep theological talks. They just want to know Jesus. And so
Mhm.
as you walk through this and so many people are kind of wrestling with, how do I approach this? How do I grow the kingdom? What are those leadership strategies? How do you go out there and just, keep it basic, at least in the beginning, of just trying to grow up people to, have those seeds planted in, lives of so many people?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the reality is when if we're talking about this from like a church perspective,
Right.
you got a bunch of people there. There are people at all different phases of
Mhm.
where they're at in their personal development, in their spiritual development, in their faith development, and you have to kind of meet them where they're at. So let's just, for sort of a metaphor, let's think of like human development, right? So I mentioned I have kids, right? There's a first phase of parenting that's like meet their needs for them, keep them alive, teach them to obey you,
Mhm.
fundamentals of like look both ways before you cross the street,
Right.
don't stick your finger in the light socket, you
Yeah.
know what I mean, don't pull the dog's tail, there's all that kind of stuff, don't kick your brother. So that's fundamental. And in a sense, when you come to faith, there is some fundamentals that are very simple, but around understanding who God is in a fundamental sense, some basics of conduct and how we treat God's word and all those kind of things. But just like, I have a 17-year-old daughter, our conversations have gotten quite complicated, right? As we start looking at the complexity of life, you start looking at, again, God's word. There is a lot of complexity into God's word. And that's where you see both, right? You look at the Bible, you go, my goodness, this is a library of 66 books, multiple genres. You think about, when you and I are reading the Bible in English, we're reading something that has been an interpretation of an ancient text that's now turned into a translation, right? Every translation was an interpretation first. Someone interpreted the Hebrew or the Aramaic or the Greek, and then they put it into a new language. So the complication around that, around even, again, a lot of the genres, a lot of what's going on contextually is massive. But what do you see Jesus say a lot? He brings it into something quite simple. He's like, look, you can boil down all the law and the prophets into this. He'll take it like, hey, the kingdom of heaven is like this. And it'll be something everyone can understand, everyone can relate to. So I think the way I sort of tend to approach it, if you're looking at kind of a framework, depending on where someone's maturity is, you want to help them find the fundamentals. Once they do, now I want to actually pull you out of overly simplistic thinking into seeing more complexity, because not everything is black and white. Not everything, even, again, the Bible, sometimes people mishandle it by oversimplifying something when there's really more there that we need to look at. So if someone sort of understands and grasps simplicity, I want to be careful they're not oversimplifying and help them wade into the complexity. Of course, if they're getting lost in the complexity, which can happen, like you said,
Right.
you can get so lost in the theological conundrums and all the nuance that you miss the forest for the trees. So if I find somebody getting lost in the complexity, bring them back to some fundamental simplicity, right? So I think it's just kind of, then that's where, when we talk about the infrastructure organizationally of the church, you go, are we built for that? Like, do we have the sort of community where each person, just like a family, can be, can be met where they are, and to kind of take that next step. So I know I kind of said a lot there, but that's
No, I
kind of
love it.
generally how I approach it. Like, if, somebody will ask me, hey, what do you tell somebody who's asked this question? And I'd be like, well, first I would figure out who they are. I'd figure out what led to that question. And I'd probably ask a bunch of questions to them before I even answer the question they asked me, because it would help me to understand the root of it, where they're coming from, and maybe what they need. So again, what we try to do is, within this community, as it's growing, continue to help people find the right context, whether it's groups or different ministries that we have to help people to be met right where they're at and to take that next step.
I do want to get into the Columbus, Ohio community at large. And I know, obviously, if we're going to go football, which I know you do have a role in relationship with some of those guys, obviously last year's team, something was special there. And, I feel like when you look at it, we see a lot of believers in, sports, athletics. It's obviously great to see that. But there was something different about that Ohio State team. You talk about, some of those guys on that team, TreVeyon, obviously a lot of those guys, there was something different, almost like you had mini pastors throughout the field there. And I want to ask about that, because you obviously are in that community, you've seen it, you saw the rise of that football team, and obviously those guys have gone to do great things too. How special has it been seeing just Columbus, Ohio, just that area of this world really grow in their faith?
Yeah. So, we've been here for a while now. So I've met over the years a lot of different, Buckeyes, and, obviously, Columbus, Ohio State's really kind of the world kind of revolves around the university, right? It employs a lot of people around here. It's a huge employer in the city, huge part of the culture of the city. Of course, when you have a winning team like that, it becomes part of the pride of the city and the identity of the city, which in some ways is cool and fun, but it also can be a little much, right? Like, you think about, you're an 18, 19-year-old football player, young man, and now you've got like the identity of the city riding on your back. And, when those guys are doing great, they get put on this pedestal and glorified. And then when they're not, they're getting heckled They just went out for chicken wings, man, and they got like heckled because they, lost to the team up north or something.
Mhm.
So that's a lot of volatility, man, for someone, for anybody, frankly. But when
Sure.
you're 18 or 19, to be sometimes deified and other times, villainized, that's a lot.
Mm.
Um, so you see sometimes people who get sucked into that vortex can almost become a little full of themselves. These guys, I kid you not, nobody's perfect, but these are unbelievable guys. I
Mhm.
mean, tremendously humble. Um, G. Scott, after the Buckeyes lost that huge game to the team up north, and everybody was losing their absolute minds. I mean, the city was burning, right? It was like people made such a big deal out of it. Um, that Sunday, we had a gentleman in the church who was going to be baptized who was in a wheelchair.
Mhm.
So we were like, this is going to be a little challenging because we had to hoist him out of his wheelchair into the water, baptize him, and then he's going to be wet in the tank and hoist him back to get him on the wheelchair. So they had this whole apparatus where they needed to lift him in and out. And so one of our pastors said, "Hey, this is what we have going, and we need some guys who are strong enough to lift this guy in and out." So, okay, they had just lost this game. Everywhere you go in the city, people are, upset. These guys are licking their wounds. I text G, is literally the next Sunday. I said, "Hey, this week, man, we got this situation. Any chance you can be at service to help hoist this guy uh, out of the tank?" He hit me back, absolutely. So here he is, man, licking his own wounds a few days after the whole world's treating him, like a loser. And
Mhm.
he shows up to help lift a man out of the chair. I mean, it's a huge act of humility.
Right.
And frankly, he didn't care what anybody said to him. I'm going to be a part of this man's moment. It was just he could have said no and it wouldn't have made him a bad guy, but it just showed where his heart is. TreVeyon is one of the most sincere human beings I've ever met in my entire life. I mean, he is a wonderful person. JT Tuimalau, Will Howard, these are really, 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 truly sincere people. That doesn't mean we should put them on a pedestal and expect them to never fail because they're humans.
Right.
But they're really truly going after the Lord. So I think certainly that authenticity is what spilled out in the locker room because you can go out and score a touchdown and give God all the glory and
Mm.
and do all this, but your guys in the locker room know if you're legit or not. The guys in the locker
Mhm.
room know if you're phony. And so I think the character and the sincerity of some of those core players is really what got the attention of their teammates that caused them to take this seriously. Now that I see who you are, I'm interested in what you have to say. And because
Mhm.
who they were stood up, now the message had credibility. And then it started to, catch fire on the team. So that was just a joy to watch. I just, where I was coming from, I just didn't want to get in the way. I was like trying to just support those guys the best I could. And sometimes it was meeting with them, teaching them how to study their Bible a little bit, or just, helping them work through some of their questions. But it was neat to see, man. And the cool thing is it's not over. I mean, those guys, G's playing for the Washington Commanders. Trey is with the Patriots.
Mhm.
Tuimalau is with the Colts. Ibuka is with the Buccaneers. So it's spreading, but then really even the team that's here. I mean, a lot of these guys have continued on. Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles and a lot of these guys that really are sincere in their faith. You see it continuing to work. So it was definitely a cool thing to observe.
That's really a testament to truly having the fruit that Jesus talks about. Really reflecting that because you brought up that one interesting point there, which is, like I said, we see so many athletes, give glory and credit to Jesus. Obviously, it's great, but are they always producing fruit? And I think a lot of time we look at athletes and you say, and obviously they're all work in progress, not just taking shots at anybody, but it's why there's someone different there. And so I just want to kind of ask about that as you see the impact of, when you truly live out the walk with Jesus in a locker room. It's not just something that happens just for that time span. It's now trickled into post years, obviously this year, next year, probably. How impactful is it when you truly walk out that identity as a follower of Jesus? What's the ramifications and the ripple effect that then causes?
All right, so think of that parable when Jesus talks about, it's like the parable of the sower and the soil, right? So he's
Right.
like, all right, you've got the seed, which is the word of God. You've got the soil, which is the heart.
Hmm.
And he says the seed goes on the soil and it's good seed and it hits good soil. And then he gives like the different scenarios. So he's like, some of it gets choked out by thorns.
Right.
Some of it hits like rocky soil, and then he's like, and some of it hits really good soil and it produces fruit like hundredfold,
Hmm.
right? So then he breaks it down. Hey, some of it gets choked out by the worries and the cares of the world, and some of it was shallow. It never got deep roots. So then when the hardships of life came, it just got, once something wasn't fair or something broke your heart, now you've got no depth.
Hmm.
And then he's like, but then some of it is good seed and it hits good soil and it produces that fruit. So for me personally, I recognize like where I see as my purpose or my part of the mission is to do the best I can to put God's word, the good seed out there. I don't have any control of the soil, right? Like
Right.
Zach, I mean, what God does in terms of bearing fruit in your life or G. Scott's life or TreVeyon Henderson's life or whoever, that is your soil, you and the Lord, right? Working to keep the thorns out and the rocks out and to
Right.
bear the fruit you're supposed to bear. My part of it, okay, one, I'm soil too, so I'm trying to bear fruit myself. But at
Hmm.
the same time, I'm putting out just like within the fruit, there's a seed in there, right?
Hmm.
The apple has a seed in the middle. So I'm bearing fruit, I'm putting out seed, and then I'm trusting if I put out the true word of God, I put that good seed out there, it's going to hit some soil. And some of it'll be rocky and thorny and it won't be very deep and it'll go out. That's not the seed's fault. It's not my fault. I'm doing my job to try to put the seed out there.
Hmm.
And then some of it is going to get choked out. I can't do anything about that. But then others will hit good fertile soil and it'll produce fruit. And that fruit I'm going to keep in context in my life because I didn't produce the fruit. All I did was put out the seed. And when the fruit bear, that's me enjoying the view of what you and God are doing together. And I
Hmm.
celebrate God. I give him the glory and I encourage you because good job, Zach. You took God's word and you let it take root in your heart and you bore the fruit you were meant to bear. So I take joy in it, but I don't take credit for it.
Hmm.
I simply take credit essentially or affirmation for just me being faithful to putting the seed out there. But the fruit, that's something that you and the Lord do together. And again, to me, I just get really excited about seeing that thing happen and keeping it in its proper context. So again, with each of those players, I'm glad to have a role in that thing, but I know what my part is, right? And I know what God's part is, and I know what their part is. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
I love that. Now, I also want to kind of dive into mental health with yourself because I know you've obviously spoken a lot about that. You've had multiple series throughout your church just talking about that. And,
Mhm.
one of those aspects is the impact of meditation and prayer. I think that's obviously a huge thing that for any believer, that's our safety net. That's the part that kind of gets us rejuvenated. It's the part that gets our fellowship with Jesus. And I know we just talking about this, a study out there, people that study and do spiritual practice of any kind at least have a 40% thicker prefrontal cortex. It's obviously proven by science and by life experience there. I want to ask about this aspect as you go through this. You guys have had the Hope Fund. You guys have obviously a massive, push towards mental health. What placed on your heart to really go out after that industry, kind of that avenue of life?
Yeah, well, I think it's really good that this has become um, a conversation that people are having a lot, right? For a long time, I think that That was difficult to have, because it made people feel weak, or they maybe were worried about a stigma. Someone's going to think I'm crazy, or they're going to think I'm sick, or whatever it might be. So I think for a long time, it drove people into isolation and feeling like they had to hide. So I think the fact that it's a more common conversation is really good. You think about the great commandment, Luke 10:27, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with
Mhm.
all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength, right? So you think that's your body, it's your spirit, it's your relationships. So love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
It's your emotion, but it's also your mind, right? Your mental health. So I think it's extremely important. Um, I'm not like a licensed counselor, or
Right.
that's not where my formal education lies. I find myself very curious about brain science. I find myself very curious about psychology, and even counseling. I listen to a lot of stuff on that, so I'm sort of a amateur enthusiast
Sure.
around that. But I think it takes a lot of courage to be honest about where a person's at, and I also think it's elusive. So think of it like this: if I run out of gas in my car, there's no denying it. Right, the car just won't move, and the gas gauge says E, and the light's on, and it's at zero, and it literally won't start. If I'm at E on my bank account, there's no denying it. They gave me a statement. It says zero. I've got nothing in there. I can't
Mhm.
spend any money. Or even maybe I'm in the negative, right? I've got debt. When it comes to emotional or mental health, it's not that clear. I don't have a gas gauge. I don't get a bank statement on my mind.
Right.
I just have these feelings I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know if it's normal or if it's not normal. I don't know what's the best course of action. Do I just sort of stay in the fight, or do I need to pull myself out of the fight? So I
Mhm.
think with all of that, to try to fight for clarity means it's not as simple as a spreadsheet. It's going to take some conversation. It's going to take getting some help.
Right.
Having somebody who knows more than I do, or sees patterns, like does this for a living, or again has more wisdom or understanding in this area, for me to open up, to be honest about where I am, and to then come up with how do I work myself to a healthier place. What are the areas I can find healing, and what are the areas where I may have to learn how to deal with this, in some kind of way. And what is seasonal? What is something that's going to be just something that over time will go away, and what are things that won't, that are
Mhm.
lasting. So um, all of that to say, I think it's really important, and I think as a church, it's important to have sort of that holistic leaning. Otherwise, I've seen people do a lot of damage where, in a desire, an attempt to honor God and to point people to God, they just say, well, you just got to pray, pray and you'll be fine. Well, yeah, I mean, I think meditation and fixing your mind on the Lord, and there's all kinds of benefits to that, including mental health,
Right.
but it may not be quite that simple of a solution, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it may be. Definitely not limiting what God can do, because God could heal something like that, and sometimes He does. But there are other times where God uses other things that may not be this instantaneous altar experience to help somebody to get to a better place. So I think we have to be willing to embrace all of that, right? Whether it's something that happens in a split second, or something that might take years, and support, and uh, you know learning things we don't know today, so that we can
Right.
learn more. So I have a lot of grace for it. I have a lot of grace for people who and a lot of respect for people who are willing to get in there and fight that fight, be honest about it, and do whatever it takes to help get to a better place.
Now, I'm curious for yourself personally, because obviously you talk about mental health, and that can change depending on each person there for yourself. But I know pastors are placed in a very tough predicament. Obviously, when you're a pastor, everyone's looking towards yourself as that kind of help for yourself. You are that person. It's kind of difficult sometimes to find that. as yourself, you've gone through this journey now, being in ministry for many, many years, and as you continue to go through it, what are your kind of strategies? Because I'm not sure what scale it could be on for yourself, but the ups and downs of life. How as a
Mhm.
pastor, like what is your go-to plan? How do you overcome any form of mental health issues?
Great question. So I've done a bunch of things over the years. So a little bit about my story. So both of my sons have autism, and
Mhm.
I didn't see that coming. My first son, when he was diagnosed, it threw me for a loop. It took us a few years to realize what was going on, but I was trying like crazy to bond with him. Was having a hard time doing that.
Mhm.
Um, and my wife and I had a little tension in our relationship because I was like, I think something's wrong with him. And she's like, no, I don't think so. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, well, we need to get him screened. And she's like, no, I don't think you know what's going on. So we were kind of butting heads a little bit. And
Sure.
then eventually he started getting worse. And so it was one of those things. I didn't know much at all about autism. And now something's happening to your son that you can't control. Like I can't protect them from it or provide them a solution. So I was overwhelmed, and it was in the middle of, the church is growing like crazy. I have all these responsibilities. So I felt like, by the way, and then our second son was born and he also has autism. So in that season, I've got this growing church. I've got this three kids. I've got a neurotypical daughter who I'm trying to, parent uniquely. And then I've got these two boys and I'm trying to define reality and then be a healthy dude in the process, and have something to say on Sunday and show up for our staff and be able to be there for our church. It was just, I felt like had the weight of the world on me. So in the process, I did a bunch of things. One was I've met with professional counselors, just to be able to work through stuff, talk through stuff, get some things out. So I encourage people to do that. That was a good experience for me. I also surrounded myself with some veteran guys, like some older guys.
Mhm.
Nothing wrong with peers. Peers are great, and that has a place. But frankly, like a lot of this was in my late 30s when it started, and all my peers were guys who were in the same season of life I was. They were overwhelmed. They had their own challenges, and so when I'm calling them like, dude, I'm overwhelmed, they're like, yeah, me too. So I'm so I started meeting with 60, 70-year-old guys, who had been there and done that, and were in a little different season of life, and gleaning from their wisdom and learning from their temperament, and just finding a lot of safety and security in that. And then my wife and I, determined that our challenges were not going to destroy our relationship. We committed, let's, no matter how frustrated we get with each other, no matter how tough of a day we have, we're going to keep coming back to each other. So she's been a real haven for me, and I've tried to be the same for her. And of course, we've had our moments of tension and all of that, because stuff is hard and it is emotional at times, and you're not your best self all the time. So we've had that, but for the most part, I mean, we've been it. Well, for sure, this whole thing it's been an agent of bringing us together, and that was because we chose that. I 100% can see how those sorts of challenges can drive a wedge, and at times cause people to say and do things that do irreparable damage. So you have to make that choice and keep committing to it. So in the middle of all that, frankly, it was hard sometimes to know what was just a hard season and what was a mental health. Is this coming from something chemical? Is this just is this internally driven, or is this just based on environment and everything I have going on that's just
Mhm.
hard? I didn't always know the answer to that. Depression runs in my family, so I have on both sides of my family. There's that.
Mhm.
So I'm aware that there may be something connected to me in that way, and you don't necessarily always have certainty on the answer. I think that the the key is doing the best you can to keep moving ahead, to keep moving forward, not sweeping things under the rug or being in denial, but to go, what do I need in this season? How do I, again, look forward? What's the next right thing I need to do? and what support do I need, and ask for help where you need help, and then do what's your part of it to do. Because there are some things, Zach, only you can do,
Right.
right? No matter how much I loved or supported you, or no matter how wise of advice I gave you, there are some things that when it comes to Zach's life, only Zach can do. So
Mhm.
when it came to that for me, I can lean on OG pastors and veteran wise people, and sometimes my wife, and sometimes a professional counselor. But then there are some things I just have to
Mm.
buck up and go and do what you got. Put one foot in front of the other by faith, and win the day, or win the minute.
I want to kind of carry on with what you just said right there, because I do feel like obviously someone that went through some issues a little few years ago, back looking back at it, part of that is that, you can look and research as much as you want. You can do whatever you need in that aspect, but sometimes that personal accountability is saying, let's just go, let's get some minor victories. It could be as small as, making your bed in the morning. It could be as small as getting a lift in, going for a run, whatever it is. And I know you have the athletic background as well. As you've kind of said, I'm, working out, those type of aspects are part of your life. How much does that
Mhm.
kind of incorporate and saying, that masculinity for always for a man, but that testosterone, that just ability to kind of be victorious, have accomplishments, victories throughout their day. How big of
Mhm.
that has that kind of helped influence you now as you become, the Pastor Greg Ford that we know you as?
Yeah, very important. I mean, the reality is, okay, I mentioned earlier, heart, soul, mind, strength, neighbor. So you go mind, body,
Mhm.
soul, relationships. Okay. If one of those starts slipping, sometimes you can cascade, right? So if my emotions are out of whack, which they were and have
Mhm.
been, and sometimes still are,
Right.
what I don't want to do is let my emotions being out of whack leading to my mind being out of whack, leading to my relationships being out of whack, leading to my body being out of whack. And now I spiral in a vicious, nasty
Mm.
spiral down, right? So part of when my emotions are down, I need to be intentional about my body being strong, my body being up. If I turn my sadness or my confusion or my anger into overeating and becoming slothful, what
Mhm.
happens now? Well, now I feel my body feels terrible, right? Which, how's that going to impact my emotions?
Yep.
How's that going to impact my mind? How's that going to impact my relationships? And it just one thing leads to another. So one of the ways to kind of pull the nose up is to go, I want to, even though I'm not going to be able to solve my feelings with around my sons or around whatever it is that's frustrating me or overwhelming me, what I can do is strengthen some of these other areas while I'm working on that area, right?
Mhm.
So for me, the consistency around my body, of course, endorphins are a blessing.
Yep.
Um, certainly you could build your body up as a way of avoiding your mental health improvements, or you build up your body at the expense of working through your relational challenges. So it's not necessarily foolproof, but at the same time, it's for me. When I was struggling emotionally or mentally, I felt compelled. I need to make sure that my body isn't something that is a liability. My
Mm.
physical health, I want to make sure I'm eating right. I want to make sure I'm making good health choices. Whatever I'm ingesting good things, and then I'm exercising. And of course, that is also a physical outlet, right? For you to go not only build your stamina in
Right.
general, but to also, there are times I've been open with our church. I've struggled with anger, since I was a kid.
Mm.
I don't just walk around looking angry all the time, but I have, I can get my temper up. There's certain things like I can go from zero to upset pretty quickly,
Right.
and I've gotten pretty good over the years at tempering that and knowing when to exit so that I don't make a fool out of myself or do something I'll regret. But at the same time, that's been a battle. So if I take autism, never upset with my sons for having autism. Obviously, they didn't ask for it.
Right.
But autism at times felt like it was hijacking my family. Okay. It
Mm.
affected our ability to go out and have dinner together. It affected like things that should be easy were hard. So I would feel controlled, not mad at my sons, mad at this invader in my family. Right. And now hear me, there have been a lot of beautiful things
Right.
as it relates to autism. And so I'm not saying it's all bad, but there were certain things that made our lives very difficult, and it would cause anger sometimes to well up within me. And again, exercise, working out sometimes was a very good outlet for that, to go, I'm going to get healthier. I'm going to get stronger. I want to be in this for the long haul. And I don't want my body and my health being a liability, especially as I'm fighting for regulate my emotions in my mind. Right.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, to me, that's critical. When you think of those areas of heart, soul, mind, strength, neighbor, we are so intertwined. We think of them as separate categories, but they're all intertwined. I can't separate my body and my mind. They're different, but they're the same. They're connected to
Yeah.
the same being. So yeah, I think you just want to be careful in your life, especially when things are hard, that you don't start neglecting those really important habits.
Mhm.
And what would we say in anything? Leadership, organization, business, family. Control the controllables. I
Mhm.
can't control the economy. I can't control, we're doing a building project. I can't control the city. I can't control uh, who gives and who doesn't. I can't control those things. But there are some controllables I have. Take
Right.
control of those things. So I think when it comes to your life and mine, our not that our health is fully in our control, but there's a lot of health decisions that
Definitely.
you can, with discipline, you can make, that you're going to reap it one way or another, for better or for worse.
All right, so as you said now, I think, and I 100% agree with that. I think obviously maintaining your body is a massive thing. It's been huge help for myself as well. But I don't know if you're too familiar with the whole looks maxing trend that's been going on the past about 6, 7 months now, especially for my generation. And so if you're not kind of elaborate, but essentially it's been this new trend where everything's about, making a man look as good as possible. And that could be reconstruction surgeries, the leg extension stuff. And you kind of gone to this extreme where, like I said, I think the trend's more so about 28 and under, 20 to probably 18 years old. But when you talk about this aspect, part of it, the initial thing that started 2010 was more so of a, get the most out of your body, work out, stay in shape, which is fine. We've kind of taken it to an extreme now where it's kind of making over and redoing your whole body. So I do want to ask about this aspect for men specifically. Obviously, you're a man. Is that something that obviously, and personally, I stand on the sense that, that's obviously going well past what God designed, not using his creation. Walk us through that aspect for a lot of guys that are dealing with this and saying, you know what, I need to, look a certain way to be accepted, to be valued. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I was not aware of that trend, but it makes sense. And I would say, in general, I personally think it's a good move to question your own motives about pretty much everything you do, right? Don't assume pure motives, don't assume impure motives. Really try to be introspective. In other words, looking internally to go, why do I feel driven to do that? And
Mhm.
that could be anything from, uh, us take something that would be on the surface perceived as noble, right? So if, Zach, I would say, you know what, man, I want our church to grow,
Right.
right? Is that good or bad? Well, it's good because I want to reach people for Jesus. I want more people to know Christ, and I want them to grow as disciples. And I want to fulfill ultimately the commission given to us by Jesus to go and reach the whole world.
Mm.
So, yeah, therefore it's noble. Well, it might be that, and it might be a lot of that, but maybe there's something in there that has something to do with my ego, or maybe there's something in there where I'm trying to validate myself in some way to the world around me. Um, it would be foolish of me to just assume that my motives are pure in things.
Mm.
So when you go wellness and health, or if someone's wanting to look their best, is that wrong? Not necessarily, but it might be. So
Mhm.
I would say each individual, instead of saying, hey, it's wrong to want to look your best, I would go, what is that? Why are you feeling so compelled? Why is this
Mm.
becoming something that is consuming your mind? It's what you think about all the time. It's what you're putting all your money into. It's what you're living for. It's become an idol in your life or something. Why are you so driven? And like you said, if it gets down to, I'm doing this because I'm trying to prove my value. I'm
Mm.
doing this because I'm trying to validate myself. I'm trying to get some kind of approval, whatever, self promotion. I think within that, you'd want to get to the root of that and go, is this even going to deliver that? Because that's not what good looks or a great body or whatever, If that's what you're looking to for your validation, number one, you're going to be insecure because nobody keeps their body over the long haul. It will start to deteriorate, and you'll be by definition insecure because you've built your identity on something that can and will be taken away. It's only a matter of time. So then you're going to age desperately. You'll be trying to do any and everything to hang
Mm,
on to your identity versus going, no, I find my identity in what can't be taken away, which
right.
is I'm his dearly loved son who brings him great joy, my relationship with God, the love and the acceptance in my relationship with the Lord. So, all that to say, I think that I would be really wanting to encourage each person to look in their motive and to go, why is this such a big deal to me? And ask the right question and go, is the thing I'm trying to get out of this, am I going to get it from this, or should I be looking elsewhere? Maybe think more deeply about it. And then
Mm,
from there, I mean, I think the idea of I don't think it's wrong necessarily to want to look your best or to want to feel good or to want to
sure, yeah.
essentially put your best foot forward. Like I think there's some good in that, right? When somebody is taking care of themselves, it does make a good first impression. It does make certain statements like when you see someone who's taking care of themselves, you go, okay, this is a person at least at first glance has some discipline.
Right.
They're at least somebody that shows some restraint, or there's a bit of credibility. Now you can have a great body and look great, and then have no substance, and so then it doesn't really matter. But but I think there's nothing wrong with going, I want to set an example. I want to be my best, steward my body the best I can. But I think you got to go ahead and have a deeper conversation with yourself around your motives. Be honest with yourself.
Mm. Sticking on the discipline aspect right there, I know you've also preached on that a few different times before, but we talked more specifically, I should say, on the spiritual aspect, the walk with Jesus there, and you hear, obviously you're going to have these different, these maybe it's motivation, maybe it's excitement, that rush of flow for early Christians do you have, but eventually that discipline needs to come into play where you're going to get into your word daily, you're going to spend time with Jesus, those type of aspects. How important is it to make sure you're not just running on motivation or external factors, but you really are disciplined saying, you know what, I'm going to make sure I go out all in for Jesus. I'm going to make sure I make this a daily habit and really start to form that aspect in your walk with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really important, right? So if you think about it like any relationship, okay, so let's take my wife for example. We got married. Um, we got married in 2011. Sorry, no, not 2011, 2004. We started the church in 2011. We got married in 2004.
Hmm.
Um, we have we were fully committed in the relationship on that day. We're not more married today than we were in 2004, but our relationship is deeper.
Hmm.
And it's not deeper because we had more of a commitment. It's not deeper because I'm any more faithful than I was. It's actually deeper because we've had deeper conversations and consistent experiences that we've shared together. We've been through thick and thin at this
Right.
point. So when you think about your relationship with God, if it's going to be more than just part of sort of a cultural identity or a badge that you wear, I got, you know, my Buckeye badge, I got my American flag badge, I got my Boy Scout badge, and I got my Jesus badge. If it's going to be a real relationship, it's going to be something that you invest in, that you learn more about, right? My wife and I have been together over 20 years, and I learn new things about her all the time.
Mm,
And with that, it triggers a curiosity. That curiosity makes me ask deeper questions. The deeper questions lead to new, fresh answers, new insights, and that brings a freshness to our relationship,
mm,
right? So I think in the same way, like you said, it's more than just checking a devotional box. Yeah, I read my Bible today. Yeah, I was faithful to the Lord today. It's more about that curiosity driving you into deeper learning and growing, and then causes the relationship to grow and be fresh.
all right, so you had a series a little bit ago, finding your purpose, and I want to kind of elaborate on that as well because we've kind of been heading in this direction now. But as you kind of talk about finding a purpose, your identity is obviously a little bit different than, your purpose, all these different aspects. So I want to kind of elaborate on that. When you talk about someone that's, young, or even maybe they're older, seeking, why did God put me here? What am I supposed to do? How do you answer that?
Yeah, well, so I think the answer, number one, is terms of purpose. It's a combination of starts in your relationship with God and getting, knowing who God is. But then it's the thing about your relationship with God is a big part of it is self discovery as well. So you're learning who you are, right? What are the gifts that God's put in you? Who has got, what are the things that God's made you good at, and finding joy in those gifts, and then finding what is the assignment connected to those gifts. So I think you've got there's a lot going on, right? There's the things that you're gifted to do, you're naturally gifted to do. There's your life experiences, right? So if you've walked through, so I'll give you a great example. We have a lady in our church who is in her 70s, and she was in foster care, many years ago, and she had a terrible experience in foster care. And when she came out of the foster system, she was completely alone, and it led to a lot of bad decisions that she had to fight her way out of. And now she's an older lady, and our church started working with foster teens a number of years ago, and she jumped in the mix to say, this is part of my purpose. Now, she has talents and gifts around interpersonal people skills, organizational skills. She's a really good communicator. So she's got like some raw skills
Sure.
and gifts, but part of her life experience and background is what's led to a more refined purpose. Hey, I not only want to be a good communicator and organized and people skill person, I want to do this in this capacity to help, to help bring support and to help solve something that I personally know the pain of that struggle. So I think when you look at your life, you go, as I grow in my faith, my relationship with God, my awareness of God, the revelation of God, I also am learning who I am and who He's made me to be. And I find discover my gifts. And again, how old are you,
I'm
Zach?
23.
Yeah, 23. So you're starting to discover some gifts,
Right.
and you're going to keep discovering. Like you'll try some on for size. Hey, I think I'm good at this, and you'll do it, and you might go, actually, I'm really good at it,
Mm.
and I could get way better at it. And then some of it, you'll be like, you know what? I'm pretty good at that, but I really didn't love it. Like I didn't take joy in it. I can do it. I'm proficient. Essentially, I could do it, but man, it was like a drag. And then there's some things you'll go and you'll try, and it just keeps crashing and burning. You're just not good at it.
Right.
So, and you'll discover more of those things over time. So the more you go, all right, I know who God is. I know where my identity comes from in His love. No matter how productive I am, whether I'm productive or unproductive, God loves me for who I am. So my identity's in that. I discover my gifts. And now that I discover my gifts, I go, Lord, where are you aiming me? What is my assignment? What do you want me to sink my teeth into? And then all throughout life, again, we're doing those things. And then we find joy in doing that work. And what that frees you up, Zach, to do is to actually find a deep sense of fulfillment and value in the thing God has for you to do instead of the thing that everybody else says is important. I've
Right.
seen a lot of people who want to be up the food chain. They want to be a business owner, or I want to be wealthy. I want to be a CEO. I want to be a pro ball player. I want to be a whatever they want to be, because they go, that's the top of the heap, and I want to get there because I want to be valued and respected. When I find my value and respect in who I am in Christ, in the love that no one can take away from me of God, now I'm secure enough to go, who am I? And I'm going to do that work. And the work that I'm created here to do, no matter how important you or him or her think it is, that really is irrelevant. This is the work I'm put here to do. I had a friend one time. He grew up single mom, poor. They were very, very poor, And he said one day he saw this guy driving down the road in this really nice car. They got really nice clothes. Caught his eye, and he's like, "What does that guy do for a living?" And they said somebody told him, "Oh, he's an attorney. He's a lawyer." He's like, "Well, that's what I'm going to be." He was like 8 years old or whatever. He's like, "I'm going to be a lawyer." Smart dude, grew up pre-law, gets a pre-law, passes the bar, law degree, the whole nine. Starts working in law and hates it. Absolutely hates it. He's like, "I could do it." He goes, "But my whole thing was I started doing it because I wanted to be valuable. I wanted to be seen the way that I viewed that other guy." He goes, "That no one led me in any sort of way of understanding what I'm truly gifted to do and what things actually bring me joy. It's almost like it's just this act of worship because it's like, this is who I am. I love this." And so he, in many ways went down this path trying to earn value for himself, essentially. And he found out later in life, now he's pivoted in his whole career because later, it's never too late, but he finds out later, no, this is actually what God's gifted me to do. So again, that's a big, long way to talk about purpose. His purpose for him personally wasn't, to go be a lawyer. It was connected to other things. And it took him a sort of a little bit of a broken road to get there. But he eventually got there. So I think it gets down to understanding who God is, understanding where your value comes from, your identity comes from, discovering your gifts, developing those gifts, and then walking into the opportunities that God's given you to use those gifts for his glory, and then just feeling the fulfillment of doing that work.
Something you said that I think some people might be a little shocked, as you said, you're still learning who you personally are at this point in time. People would say, okay, well, you're already a pastor. You're obviously older than myself, possibly. And when you hear that, I think some people might be, well, I'm supposed to have it all figured out now, I thought. So I'm curious then, for those guys that might be, in their early 20s, college, high school, whatever it is, and they're saying, okay, so I guess I have time to figure this out a little bit. But on top of that, where do I start? How do I start finding what my gifts are, what my purpose might be? What are those very early stages to get the ball rolling now? What would you say those early stages, steps you have to take are?
Yeah, great question. So I think two things. One is there are some things that you'll discover over time. So it's already in you, and yet you just you haven't experienced it yet. And so a life experience will draw it out of you. So some of it is discovery, but some of it also is dynamic. So let's think of those two words, discovery and dynamic. So I'll give you an example. If you ask my parents 25 years ago, "Hey, you think Greg is going to be a public speaker?" They would say, "Absolutely not."
Mm.
I didn't want to public speak. I played sports in front of people. That was fine by me, but I never wanted a microphone to get up and talk in front of people. That wasn't on my radar at all. I got the only D, this is a true story. The only D I got in high school was in speech. I hated it. I still remember my first speech was on schizophrenia, and I think I failed it. It was horrible. I never looked up from the page. I didn't want to be up there. So if you'd asked me if I was a speaker or going to be a speaker, I wouldn't have said absolutely not. I would have probably laughed at you. The irony is I had a gift I didn't understand. To me, I missed it because I thought of public speaking. Now, ironically, behind the scenes, if we were buddies, you would say, "Hey, Greg, tell these guys this story." I was a good storyteller in one-on-one at the lunch table, but not necessarily up front. I didn't think of my ability to create content in terms of study something, find the salient point, connect it to an illustration, think through application. I hadn't discovered that yet. It was in me, but I hadn't discovered it. That took a process of discovery. But then the second word, discovery, the second word is dynamic. So you are going to change. You don't know how you're going to change necessarily at this point. But when I was your age, the part of ministry or what I do now, the part that was most exciting was the leadership side. It was like, man, I could galvanize and I could organize and I could cast a vision and get everybody in the right seat on the bus and then get us all going in the right direction and let's go and get more people on. So I loved it. Didn't even matter what I was leading. I just enjoyed leadership. The older I've gotten, the more actually the the X's and O's of leadership have been less interesting to me than actually the teaching side has emerged more, right? When I was younger, I had no, and everybody around you would tell me, I had no need for peace. I'm ready to disrupt. I'm ready to if things start settling down, I'd stir it up a little bit. I was willing to work as hard. I didn't care how much pain I was in. I was like, whatever it takes. If we can see the vision, I'll pay any price to get there. I got a high pain threshold. Let's go. The older I get, the more I've started to value peace. What I'm saying is I'm dynamic. You're dynamic. There are some things you'll discover, and there are some things about you that you love doing right now that are going to change over time. Some things you're not good at yet, but you just haven't done it much. So there are some things that you go, I'm not good at, and there are some things you're not good at yet. Okay. And you don't know the difference right now because you're just not good at it. If you keep doing it, some of the stuff is a gift and it just needs development and you'll be good at it. But there are some things, Zach, I'm sorry to tell you, you could do it over and over and over again for the next 10 years and you're still not going to be good at it because it's not your gift. But you don't know the difference until you try these things on for size and you start working them. And you eventually go, you know what? I'm spinning my wheels here. This isn't for me. I've tried, I've given a great effort. I gave it 3 good years. I got a coach. I tried it and I still couldn't, it's just not hitting pavement versus this over here, which is like, yeah, I wasn't. And now now I'm getting it. Now it's clicking. Now it's rolling. Okay. Bro, you don't know the difference. You're 23. Don't be afraid for it to try it on for size. Go for it. Give it a shot. Like, don't be afraid of failure. All you're doing is sometimes process of elimination. No, that's not for me. I tried it for a while. It's not for me. Stick with it. Don't just jump off because you failed one time. Stay with it. But when you start to feel like, dude, we're spinning our wheels here, we're not getting any traction, then it's okay to pivot. No shame. I just realized that's one of those that's not for me. And then again, all of that's a discovery, and that's what I mean. You hear a lot about success being correlated. There's a correlation between success and people who aren't afraid to fail. Because you're not seeing yourself as a failure, you're saying, I'm trying to figure out, am I not good at it ever, or I'm not good at it yet? And I can only figure that out by taking action and trying it. So the more you're unafraid of, it's not going to destroy your self-image and your ego because you couldn't get it done. And I've got a bazillion stories of things that I wanted to be good at or that I tried and gave my best effort and it just wasn't it. And I had the courage to go, okay, let's pivot into something else. And then you start to collect, okay, no, I'm really good at this. Yeah, I'm really good here. Let's focus that way.
Everything you said I think is spot on, but I think in our culture today, we have this impulse issue where some people will say, I'm going to give up quickly. If it doesn't work out in 2-3 weeks, maybe in a year, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to move on, give up a little bit too soon in that aspect. As you look at then, I think it even stems further. We talk about marriages, you talk a lot of different aspects along those lines. There is this impulse issue where people want instant success. They want instant, fame. They want things to be perfect right away. As you see that and you're saying, obviously there's this, eventually for some situations you might have to pivot or whatever it might be. But what also is that saying at the same time, how do you kind of, eliminate that impulse issue where people kind of jump into conclusions a little bit too quickly in today's society?
Well, yeah, I think, so I'm not like a great handyman or anything, but I've done a few little carpentry jobs, right? And the old adage in carpentry is measure twice, cut once, right? So if you're going to cut something, measure twice, cut once. Don't measure once, cut once, because you cut once, it's cut. We can't put wood back on, right? So measure twice. Okay, cool, double check. But then there's some that measure 10 times, cut once, right? It's like, dude, you've already measured twice. You don't need to measure 10 times. So I think, when it comes to the things you take on, you don't want to just try everything all the time, because if you're taking on too many things, you're trying to do too much at once. You're not able to really know how good you could have done because you weren't focused enough to throw your whole weight into it. So I think part of it is going, okay, I'm going to give this a run. I'm going to focus myself. I'm going to measure a couple times around, is this the right thing for me to take on?
Right.
I'm not going to just go, yeah, I'm going to do a podcast on a whim. I'm going to kind of count the cost and go, okay, if I do this, that means I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that. So in order for me to give this a proper run, I need to give it my full attention for 6 months or something. I'm going to give it my full attention I'm going to give it a year where I really lock in. And so for you to make that kind of commitment to throw your weight into it, that means you have to have the discipline to go, well, I'm going to say no to this, and I'm going to say no to this, and I'm going to say no to this. Because if I try to do all that, I will never know if I could have been good at the podcast thing because I barely did it. I barely threw my weight into it. I hardly gave it any time or energy. So I don't know if it wasn't for me or I just wasn't focused enough. I didn't give it its just due. So I think, instead of trying to do 10 things at once, nobody's going to be good at 10 things at once. Nobody's going to be good at all that. That's a recipe for disaster. Pick a couple, 1, 2 things that you're wanting to try, maybe one. Focus on it. Give yourself a period of time. If you're not sure what that period of time is, do a little bit of homework, right? So we'll just use the podcast since we're on one right now, and this is something you're doing. If you're going, how much time is enough time to know if this is for me or not? Well, get in front of some other people who have created podcasts similar to what you're trying to do in terms of the measure of success and get an idea from them. Hey, how long with focused energy did you put into this before you started hitting some important metrics or whatever,
Sure.
right? So then that's not necessarily the exact roadmap you're going to take, but it's data. It gives you, it's like, okay, well, like so-and-so said it took 2 years, right? So-and-so said it took 3 years. So-and-so said it took 9 months. What do I want to give it? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a year, and then I'm going to really reevaluate. Doesn't mean I'm going to pull the plug on it after a year, but I'm going to look at a year and see how, where am I at? And then I'm going to decide, am I going to re-up and put this much into it for another year? So again, what are you doing? You're counting the cost. You're getting an idea of what is a reasonable timeline based on data of other people that have been where you're trying to go. And that way it gives you some sort of thing to measure yourself against as you're doing it. And then some of it is gut. You might go, you know what? I know I'm past the timeline, but I really love doing this. And I believe in it. And so I'm going to keep going. But again, that goes back to the soul searching self-awareness pieces. Am I just doing this because I'm too embarrassed to pull the plug, or I'm too embarrassed to fail, or, whatever it is my ego on the line? Or is this deeper than that? And if so, you keep going with it, right? Or you go, maybe in the process, who knows, like in your podcasting, maybe you take this thing and run with it for the rest of your life. Or maybe there's a conversation that you have, or something sparks from one of these conversations that might cause you to go and actually put your effort into something else, put your focus somewhere else, right? So, but you're having the discipline to think through, does this matter enough for me to edit other things out and to hyper focus? If so, then do that and start rolling with it, and let's see where it goes.
I love that. Well, my final thing I want to wrap up talking about is God's will for someone's life. I know we've kind of been going through this, but the part I really want to kind of get after is, you'll go through the situation. I'll talk about myself a little bit to get kind of give backstory, but I was a believer growing up, and it's been a few years kind of away from the faith and not actually following him, going down some sinful routes in those aspects. And people will say this, maybe it took them, maybe for myself, about 3 or 4 years. Maybe for some people it's 10, 15, 20 years. But people will say, okay, so God designed me for a specific will. Can I ever make up from that time? Obviously, you're not going to go back and relive those dates exactly, but if God's will was for you to accomplish and do X, can that still come to fruition, so many years past when you weren't walking the path that God originally had ordained for yourself?
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of a bigger theological question around like God's permissive will versus God's perfect will, right? So,
Right.
um, I, you think there are a lot of things you could do that are not necessarily in alignment with God's word. You could create some complications for your life. And in so doing, if you went and got yourself locked up in prison, all right, it would be a stretch to go, yeah, it was God's will that I went and broke the law and, got, 15 years behind bars.
Mhm.
Probably not God's perfect will, right? But like God's permissive will, which is he permitted it to happen. And then like Romans 8:28, God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So in other words, even just because I'm behind bars for 15 years doesn't mean that God can't use my life, whether
Right.
it's behind the bars, right? Or what happens when I get out. So I think the idea is I think we almost make too much of what was God's perfect and permissive will and how much of it was God orchestrating and how much of it was me going off the rails. I think the better thing, instead of getting too, those are natural questions to ask, and that's not wrong or
Right.
bad. But I think the right thing to do is to ground yourself where you are, connect to God, and start taking whatever, however perfect or not perfect it is, and extract every lesson you can from that, grow from that, develop wisdom, and then start making positive changes and putting the stuff into practice, making the best out of it, making the most out of it,
Mhm.
and not getting too overwhelmed by, well, man, I wish I wouldn't have screwed up 10 years of my life. Oh, I did this, that, and the other thing. Look, God can use somebody who's squeaky clean. God can also use somebody, right, who's made has a whole bunch of baggage.
Mhm.
Don't get too, don't spend energy woulda, coulda, shoulding, what you could have been and what you should have done. And I can't believe I did that. Bring it to the Lord right now and allow him to use it for his glory. And some of those things God will use very, very powerfully, right? Not everything that we do is necessarily part of God's will, in that, like, hey, this is what God would have preferred you to do. But
Right.
God can use all of it, and God will use all of it if you'll give it to him. And
Mhm.
he'll take it and he'll make something beautiful out of it, right? So all that to say that my encouragement would be to whoever that person is that's going and sort of getting caught up in the lost time, or the poor choice that they can't undo. Refocus yourself, give it to the Lord. Don't underestimate what God can do, even with the stuff that didn't line up with his word. It's not too late. And God will use it. I've seen him do it. More testimonies than you have time for today, of the way that God's used often very complicated, sometimes very sad seasons of someone's life.
Mhm.
And that's part of the beautiful redemption of God taking it and actually bringing something good out of it.
I love that. Well, we're going to wrap up with something that's not necessarily theological or completely biblical, but going back in your story a little bit, I believe you had a boxing match about 13 years ago or so now, or 14 years almost now, and having a boxing show myself as well on the other side of my main sports show. I got to ask you about that. What was the reason that you decided to go inside the ring and have a fight?
Yeah. So okay. So years ago, probably like in my late 20s, I had this idea of, I was reading Hebrews chapter 12, and um, I had this idea of, like, everybody's in a fight,
Hmm.
and you got all kinds of fights. You've got people who are fighting for their marriages, people who are fighting mental health, things we were talking about, people who are fighting for their career, people who are fighting their past mistakes, people are fighting in their finances, like whatever. Everybody's in a fight. And so I thought about, in Hebrews 12, it talks about, keep your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And it even talked about fighting our battles and fixing our eyes on him.
Hmm.
And um, so I had this idea: what if we do like a documentary and actually fight somebody? I'm going to train for this. And it was 5 different aspects. It was the decision to fight. So we talked about mental health. Somebody's struggling with that. At some point, you have to make the decision. I'm going to fight this.
Yep.
I'm going to go. I'm going to go get help. Right. If your marriage is on the rocks, you have to decide. We're going to fight for this. Told you, my wife and I decided when we found out our son had autism, we found out how many people with a special needs child end up divorced. We said, we're fighters. We're going to fight for this. So you have to decide, I'm going to fight. The second is training for the fight. So if you want to fight, but you're not trained for it, you're going to get whooped. So you got to go through a process of training. Some of it's skill development. Some of it's just endurance. There's no shortcut to conditioning. You got to go bite down and do it. And then there's fear of the fight. And that is, something, the stakes that are there. And you got to, the hardest part of the fight, my trainer said, is to actually get your butt in the ring. That's hard. Once you get in there, he's like, in some ways you've already won because you got in. That's very hard to do. So the fear associated. So I had a whole bunch of stuff on fear. And then the fourth is persevering in the fight. So it gets hard in a variety of ways. I got injured in the middle of the fight, continue to fight. Again, I didn't plan that. That happened, and it was a real story. But there's perseverance. And the last is winning the fight, which we talked about. Fights are a zero-sum game. Somebody won, somebody lost, unless it's a split decision or whatever. But the real life is not a zero-sum game. It's becoming a fighter. I'm going to fight through this, and not all of it is like, hey, I'm 55-0. Like sometimes you're going to get knocked down, you're going to take defeats, but it's committing to fight. And sort of the mantra was, if you're in the right fight, quitting is not an option. There are some fights you should quit on because it's not worth fighting. But then if you're in the right fight, the big part of the whole fight is picking the right fight. What fight do I need to be in? I can't be in. I'm a finite human being who's very limited. So there are a lot of fights, dude, I just won't take. I'm not getting in that way. That's not my fight to fight. This one is mine. So I'm going to fight. And when you're in the right fight, quitting's not an option. So I trained, I hired a trainer, I did all this. And I had this guy I was going to fight. Both of us were novices. He's a big, huge guy, which I love the visual of that because he was like 6'6", 300 pounds. He's a big guy. And so I thought, look, man, if you're dealing with a lifelong porn addiction, you're dealing with, you're on your third marriage, you're, like you said, you're suicidal. Okay. You've maybe even tried to take your life. You've really been close. It feels like this thing you can't beat. It's overwhelming. So I wanted that. And I wanted to experience everything I was talking about. So this guy agrees to fight. And then he pulls out of the fight the week of. So I'm like, you got to be kidding me. We had sold tickets to this thing. We were doing this whole thing to help, actually for a mental health counseling center that we were helping raise money for. He pulls out of the fight. And so then I had to fight a guy who I'd actually sparred with one time. And he was like, he had done like 10 amateur fights. He was a handful, dude. And so as much as like, it was hard because he was better than me, it really fit what we set out to do, which is to encourage people. The documentary wasn't about me proving I'm a great boxer because I'm not. I'm 0-1. I learned a lot. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great experience, but I'm not a great boxer. That wasn't the point. The point was to kind of give a real life illustration of taking on what is yours to take on. So, I ended up losing. I lost the fight on points, and it was raw, dude. I mean, I took some shots. I gave some shots. Times I had to hold on, grabbing and holding on, which again, that was part of the sermon. I mean, the guy who coached me was Jerry Page, who was a 84 gold medalist from Columbus. And when I first started sparring and stuff, a couple times I was eating some punches, and he was like, Greg, you can't be afraid to grab. He's like, sometimes you grab, like you get the guy tired, buy yourself a moment to catch your breath. Like you can grab in boxing, you need to grab, which I didn't know. Right. Well, in life, sometimes, man, you got to weather the storm. Like you got to grab and hold. You got to grab and hold, dude. Like, we got to get out of this round alive. And so there were so much application, and the reality is that I set out to do it because I was trying to help others, and I think I did help some people, but it really was deep for me. Like to a lot of people, it may have looked like this character. This is weird. Why is this pastor fighting or whatever? It was personally one of the deepest discipleship learning experiences. It was so hands on. It was so I was like learning in real time, and the application was all very deep for me personally. It was life changing, actually. So I know it helped people some, but I don't think it helped anybody more than it helped me.
Now, is there a chance we ever see you back in the ring, or are you going to retire? Are you completely retired now?
I'm fully retired, man. I'm fully retired now. I'm just a cheerleader, man.
I love it.
The most I do is a little mitt work every once in a while to get the blood pumping. That's about it.
All
But
right.
no, those days are over.
I love it. Well, I've got one final question for you. It's the question I wrap up every interview with. And let's talk about your legacy. As us believers know, one day Jesus is going to call us home. It's going to be one of the greatest days, or the greatest day of our life. And so I want to ask you, when that day does happen, you're home with Jesus, what is it that you want to be remembered for what you did for the kingdom of God on earth?
You know, I don't know if this is the right answer or not. I don't know if it's just the honest answer. I don't really worry about that too much. I'm not, I don't think it's that important that I'm remembered a lot. I mean, I think the reality is now, because we live in a moment where a lot of things are captured, like what we're doing right now, some way this will live on. I don't know how many people will watch it 20 years from now, maybe nobody, or maybe in some way it's still touching people. I don't know.
Right.
I'm okay with if I'm not remembered. I don't need my name on buildings. What I hope I did a good job of, particularly with the people closest to me, my family, the people who God's put kind of around me. I hope that I set a good example for them, the best that I could. But I hope that they feel at peace to learn from my life, both good and bad. The things that that maybe were blind spots for me, that they can see even more clearly than I can, and that they end up using my example, both positive and negative, to grow and be the best they can be and maximize their lives. I don't feel any drive toward 50 years from now, 100 years from now, people are still talking about me. I'm okay to live my leg of the race for God's glory. And if some of that echoes and somebody's still talking about me later, that's fine. I don't need that. I don't even really think about that. To me, it's more where God has me here and now, and I want to be faithful to what I have here and now, and let however it plays out. Let to God be the glory. And what I don't want to do is get so caught up trying to be epic and trying to be immortal that I miss a great opportunity to look into my wife's eyes, or that I get a great opportunity to be present with my kids or be present with you right now. Right? You know what time it is right now? I have no idea, because you and I are sitting here connecting. Right? We're sharing thoughts and ideas. Right? I want to be able to do that without worried about my ego or my, how I'm remembered. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I'm fine either way.
And that's a perfect answer. Well, Pastor Greg, it's been an absolute honor and blessing having you on the show today. And I cannot wait to see how God continues to use you throughout your life.
Thanks, Zach, man. What an honor to be a part of this, man. And keep up the good work.
Will do. You're always welcome on. God bless. If this conversation blessed you today, please hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps YouTube push this message to more people who need to hear it. If you're listening on audio, a 5-star review is a huge help. Share this episode with a friend or family member who needs encouragement, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one.